What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Ricky here, and today we're going. It's Today is my third day of reading The Big Short. 30 minutes of reading, day 3. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Right. That was the moment it first became clear that Eastman wasn't just a little cynical. He held a picture of the financial world in his head that was radically different from and less flattering than the financial world's self portrait. A few years later, he quit his job and went to work for a giant hedge fund called Chilton Investment. He lost interest in telling other people where to put their money. He thought he might be able to remain interested if he managed money himself and bet on his own judgment. Having hired Eastman, Chilton Investment had second thoughts. The whole thing about Steve, said a Chilton colleague, was yeah, he's a really smart guy, but can he pick stocks? Chilton decided that he couldn't and regulated him to his old role of analyzing companies for the guy who actually made the investment decision. Eastman hated it, but he did it, and in doing it, he learned something that prepared him uniquely for the crisis that was about to occur. He learned what was really going on inside the market for consumer loan. The year was now 2002. There were no public subprime lending companies left in America. There was, however, an ancient consumer lending giant called Household Finance Corporation. Created in the 1870s, it had long been a leader in the field. Eastman understood the company well, he thought, until he realized that he didn't. In early 2002, he got his hand on Household's new sales document offering home equity loan. The company's CEO, Bill Aldinger had grown Households even as his competitor went bankrupt. Americans digest, digesting the internet bust seemed in no position to take on new debts, and yet Household was making loans at a faster pace than ever. A big source of its growth had been the second mortgage. The document offered a 15-year fixed rate loan, but it was bizarrely dis- disguised as a 30-year loan. Hmm. It took the stream of payment the homeowner would make to Household over 15 years, spread it hypothetically over 30 years, and asked, if you were making the same dollar payment over 30 years that you are in fact making over 15, what would you what would your effective rate of interest be? It was a weird, dishonest sales pitch. The borrower was told he had an effective interest rate of 7% when he was in fact paying something like 12.5%. It was blatant fraud, said Eastman. They were tricking their customers. It didn't take long for Eastman to find complaints from borrowers who had figured out what had just happened to them. He sourced small newspapers around the country. In the town of Bellingham, Washington, the last city of any size before you reach Canada, he found a reporter named John Stark, who wrote for the Bellingham News. Before Eastman called him out of the blue, Stark had written a small piece about four locals who thought they had been deceived by households and found a plaintiff attorney willing to sue the company and void the mortgage contract. I was skeptical at first, says Stark. I thought, here's another person who has borrowed too much money and hire a lawyer. I wasn't too sympathetic. When the piece was published, it drew a crowd. Hundreds of people in and around Bellingham had picked up the newspaper to discover that their 7% mortgage was in fact a 12.5% mortgage. People were coming out of the woodwork, says Stark. They were angry. A lot of them didn't realize what had happened to them. Whatever Eastman was meant to be doing got pushed to one side. His job became a single minded um, crusade against the Household Finance Corporation. He alerted newspapers, reporters, he called up magazine writers, he became friendly with the Association of Community Organization for Reform Now, ACORN, which must be the first time a guy from Wall Street hedge fund exhibits such interest in an organization devoted to guarding the interests of the poor. He repeatedly pestered the office of the Attorney General of the state of Washington. He was incredulous to learn that the Attorney General had investigated households and then been prevented by a state judge from releasing the result of his investigation. Eastman obtained a copy of its content confirmed his worst suspicion. I would say to the guy in the Attorney General's office, why aren't you arresting people? He said. They are a powerful company. If they're gone, who would make subprime loan in the state of Washington? I said, believe me, there'll be a train full of people coming to lend money. Really, it was a federal issue. Household was peddling these deceptive mortgages all over the country, yet the federal government failed to act. Instead, at the end of 2002, Household settled a class action suit out of court and agreed to pay $484 million fine distributed to 12 states. The following year, it sold itself and its giant portfolio of subprime loan for $15.5 billion to the British financial conglomerate, the HSBC Group. Eastman was genuinely shocked. It never entered my mind that this could possibly happen, he said. This wasn't just another company. This was the biggest company by far making subprime loans, and it was engaged in just blatant fraud. They should have taken the CEO out and hung him up by his fucking testicles. Instead, they sold the company and the CEO made $100 million. And I thought, whoa, that one didn't end the way it should have. His pessimism toward high finance was becoming tainted with political ideas. That's when I started to see the social implication, he said. If you are going to start a regulatory regime from scratch, you design it to protect middle and lower middle income people because the opportunity for them to get ripped off was so high. Instead, what we had was a regime where those were the people who were protected the least. Eastman left, Eastman left work at noon every Wednesday so that he might be present at Midtown Cosmic when the new shipment of stories arrived. He knew more than any grown man should about the lives of various superheroes. He knew the Green Lantern oath by heart, for instance, and understood Batman's inner life better than the Cap Crusader himself. Before the death of his son, Eastman had read the adult version of the comic he had read as a child. Spider-Man was his favorite. Now he read only the darkest adult comics and favored those that took familiar fairy tale and rearranged them without changing any of the facts, so that the story became less familiar and something other than a fairy tale, telling a story that is consistent with everything that happened before, as he put it. And yet the story is totally different, and it leads you to look at the earlier episodes differently. He preferred relations between Snow White and the dwarves to be a bit more fraught. Now a fairy tale was being reinvented before his eyes in the financial market. I started to look more closely at what a subprime mortgage loan was all about, he said. A subprime auto loan is in some way honest because it's a fixed rate. They may be charging you high fee and ripping you your heart out, but at least you know it. The subprime mortgage loan was a cheat. You're basically throwing someone in by telling them you are going to pay off all your other loan, your credit card debt, your auto loan by taking this one loan. And look at the low rate, but that low rate isn't the real rate. It's a teaser rate. Obsessing over household, he attended a lunch organized by a big Wall Street firm. The guest speaker was Herb Sandler, the CEO of a giant saving and loan called Golden West Financial Corporation. Someone asked him if he believed in the free checking model, recalled Eastman, and he said, "Turn off your tape recorder." Everyone turned off their tape recorders, and he explained that they avoided free checking because it was really a tax on poor people in the form of fines for overthrowing their checking account, and that banks that used it were really just banking on being able to rip off poor people even more than they could if they charged them for their checks. Eastman asked, "Are any regulators interested in this?" "No," said Sandler. "That's when I decided the system was really fuck the poor." In his youth, Eastman had been a strident Republican. He joined right-wing organization, voted for Reagan twice, and even loved Robert Bork. It wasn't until he got to Wall Street, oddly, that his politics drift left. He attributed his first baby steps back to the middle of the political spectrum, to the end of the Cold War. I wasn't as right wing because there wasn't as much to be right wing about. By the time household CEO Bill Oettinger collected his $100 million, Eastman was on his way to becoming the financial market's first socialist. When you're a conservative Republican, you never think people are making money by ripping other people off. He said his mind was now fully open to the possibility. "I now realized there was an entire industry called consumer finance that basically exists to rip people off." Denied the chance to manage money. Oh, again. Denied the chance to manage money by his hedge fund employer, he quit and tried to start his own hedge fund, an outfit called Front Point Partner, soon to be wholly owned by Morgan Stanley, housed a collection of hedge funds. In early 2004, Morgan Stanley agreed to let Eastman set up a fund that focused exclusively on financial companies, Wall Street banks, home builders, mortgage originators, companies with big financial services division, General Electric, for instance, and anyone else who touched American finance. Morgan Stanley took a cut of the fee off the top and provided him with office space, furniture, and support staff. The only thing they didn't supply him with was money. Eastman was expected to drum that up on his own. He flew all over the world and eventually met hundreds of big-time investors. "Basically, we tried to raise money and didn't really do it," he says. "Everyone said, 'It's a pleasure to meet you. Let's see how you do.'" By the spring of 2004, he was in a state he hadn't raised money, but he didn't know that he would. He didn't even know if he could. He certainly didn't believe that the world was fair, or that things always worked out for the best, or that he enjoyed some special protection from life's accidents. He was waking up at 4 in the morning, drenched in sweat. He was also in therapy. He was still Eastman, however, and so it wasn't conventional therapy work group. It was called handful of professionals gathered with a trained psychotherapist to share their problem in a safe environment. Eastman would bust in late to these meetings, talk through whatever was bothering him, and then rush off before the other had a chance to tell him about their problem. After he had done this a couple of times, the therapist said something to him about it, but he didn't appear to have heard her. So she took to calling Eastman's wife, whom she knew, to ask her to have a word with her husband. That didn't work either. I always knew when he'd been to groups, said Valerie, because she called and says he did it again. Valerie was clearly wary of the red race. She told Eastman that if this latest Wall Street venture didn't work out, they would leave New York for Rhode Island and open a bed and breakfast. Valerie had scouted places and spoke often about spending more time with the twins she had given birth to, and even raising chickens. It was almost as hard for Eastman to imagine himself raising chickens as it was for people who knew him, but he agreed. The idea of it was so unbelievably unappealing to him, says his wife, that he started to work harder. Eastman traveled all over Europe and the United States, searching for people willing to invest with him, and found exactly one, an insurance company, which staked him to $50 million. It wasn't enough to create a sustainable equity fund, but it was a start. Instead of money, Eastman attracted people whose view of the world were as shaded as his own. Whitney, who had just co-authored a gloomy report called "A Home Without Equity is Just a Rental with Debt," came right away. Porter Collins, a two-time Olympic Oscar man who had worked with Eastman at Chilton Investment and never really understood why the guy with the bright idea wasn't given more authority, came along too. Danny Moose, who became Eastman's head trader, came third. Danny had worked as a salesman at Oppenheimer and Co. and had pungent memories of Eastman doing and saying all sort of things that sell-side analysts seldom did. In the middle of one trading day, for instance, Eastman had walked to the podium at the center of the Oppenheimer trading floor, called for everyone's attention, announced that the following 8 stocks are going to zero, and then list 8 companies that indeed went bankrupt. Raised in Georgia, the son of a finance professor, Danny was less openly fatal- fatalistic than Bernie or Steve, but he nevertheless shared a general sense that bad things can and do happen, especially in Wall Street. When a Wall Street firm helped him to get into a trade that seemed perfect in every way, he asked the salesman, "I appreciate this, but I just want to know one thing. How are you going to fuck me?" "Hey, hey, hey, come on. Would never do that," the trader started to say, but Danny, though perfectly polite, was insistent. "We both know that un- unaltered, unaltered good things like this trade don't just happen between little hedge fund and big Wall Street firm. I'll do it, but only after you explain to me how you are going to fuck me." And the salesman explained how he was going to fuck him, and then they did a trade. All of them enjoyed immensely the idea of running money with Steve Eastman. Working for Eastman, you never felt you were working for Eastman. He'd teach you, but he wouldn't supervise you. Eastman also put a fine point on the absurdity. They saw everything around them. "Steve's fun to take to any Wall Street meeting," said Benny, "because he'll say, 'Explain that to me 30 different times,' or 'Could you explain that more in English?' Because once you do that, there's a few things you learn. For a start, you figure out if they even know what they're talking about, and a lot of the time they don't." By early 2005, Eastman's little group shared a sense that a great a great many people working on Wall Street couldn't possibly understand what they were doing. The subprime mortgage machine was up and running again, as if it had never broken down in the first place. If the first act of subprime lending had been freaky, the second act was terrifying. $30 billion was a big year for subprime lending in the mid 1990s. In 2000, there had been $130 billion in subprime mortgage lending, and $55 billion worth of those loans had been repackaged as mortgage bonds. In 2005, there would be $625 billion in subprime mortgage loan, $507 billion of which found its way into mortgage bond, half $1 trillion in subprime mortgage backed bonds in a single year. Subprime lending was booming, even as interest rates were rising, which made no sense at all. Even more shocking was that the terms of the loans were changing in ways that increased the likelihood they would go bad. Back in 1996, 65% of subprime loans had been fixed rate, meaning that typical subprime borrowers might be getting screwed. But at least they knew for sure how much they owned each month until they paid off the loan. By 2005, 75% of subprime loan were some form of floating rate, usually fixed for the first 2 years. The original cast of subprime financiers had been sunk by the small fraction of the loan they made that they had kept on their books. The market might have learned a simple lesson: don't make loans to people who can't repay them. Instead, it learned a complicated one: you can keep on making these loans, just don't keep them on your books. Make the loans, then sell them off to fixed income departments of big Wall Street investment banks, which will in turn package them into bonds and sell them to investors. Long Beach Savings was the first existing bank to adopt what was called the originate and sell model. This proved such a hit. Wall Street would buy your loans even if you would not. That, that a new company called B&C Mortgage was founded to do nothing but originate and sell. Lehman Brothers thought that was such a great idea that they bought B&C Mortgage. By early 2005, all the big Wall Street investment banks were deep into the subprime game. Bear Stearns, Merlin, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley all had what they termed shelf for their subprime worries, with strange names like HEAT and SEL and GSAMP that make it a bit more difficult for the general audience to see that these subprime bonds were being underwritten by Wall Street's biggest name. Eastman and his team had a form had a from the ground up understanding of both the US housing market and Wall Street. They knew most of the subprime lenders, the guy on the ground making the loan. Many were the very same characters who had created the late 1990s debacle. Eastman was predisposed to suspect the worst of whatever Goldman Sachs might be doing with the debts of lower middle class Americans. You have to understand, he says. I did subprime first. I lived with the worst first. These guys lied to infinity. What I learned from that experience was that Wall Street didn't give a shit what it sold. What he couldn't understand was who was buying the bonds from the second wave of subprime mortgage lending. The very first day, we said, there's going to come a time when we're going to make a fortune shorting this stuff. It's going to blow up. We just don't know how or when. By this stuff, Eastman meant the stock of companies involved in subprime lending. Stock prices could do all sort of crazy things. He didn't want to short them until the loan started going bad. To that end, Vanny kept a close eye on the behavior of American subprime mortgage borrowers. On the 25th of each month, the remittance report arrived on his computer screen and he scanned them for any uptick in delinquencies. According to the things we were tracking, said Vinny, the credit quality was still good, at least until the second half of 2005. In the fog of the first 18 months of running his own business, Eastman had an epiphany, an unidentifiable moment when he realized he'd been missing something obvious. Here he was trying to figure out which stock to pick, but the fate of the stock depended increasingly on the bond. As the subprime mortgage market grew, every financial company was, one way or another, exposed to it. The fixed income world dwarfed the equity world. He said, The equity world is like a fucking zit compared to the bond market. Just about every major Wall Street investment bank was effectively run by its bond department. In most cases, Dick Fuld at Lehman Brothers, John Mack at Morgan Stanley, Jimmy Kane at Bear Stearns. The CEO was a former bond guy ever since the 1980s, when the lending bond firm Lehman Brothers had made so much money that it looked as if it was in a different industry than the other firms. The bond market had been where the big money was made. It was the golden rule, said Eastman. The people who have the gold make the rules. Most people didn't understand how what amounted to a two-decade bomb in the bond market had overwhelmed everything else. Eastman certainly hadn't. Now he did. He needed to learn everything he could about the fixed income world. He had plans for the bond market. What he didn't know was that the bond market also had plans for him. It was about to create an Eastman-shaped hole. That was chapter 1. Chapter 2. In the Land of the Blind. Writing a check separates a commitment from a conversation. Warren Buffett. In early 2004, another stock market investor, Michael Burry, immersed himself for the first time in the bond market. He learned all he could about how money got borrowed and lent in America. He didn't talk to anyone about what became his new obsession. He just sat alone in his office in San Jose, California, and read how subprime mortgage bond worked. A giant number of individual loans got piled up into a tower. The top floor got their money back first and so got the highest rating from Moody's and S&P's and the lowest interest rate. The low floors got their money back last, suffered the first losses, and got the lowest rating from Moody and S&P. Because they were taking on more risk, the investor in the bottom floors received a higher rate of interest than investor in the top floors. Investor who bought mortgage bond had to decide in which floor of the tower they wanted to invest. But Michael Burry wasn't thinking about buying mortgage bonds. He was wondering how he might short a prime mortgage bond. Every mortgage bond came with its own mind-numbingly tedious 130 prospectus. If you read the fine print, you saw that each was its own little corporation. Burry spent the end of 2004 and early 2005 scanning hundreds and actually reading thousands of them. Certain he was the only one apart from the lawyers who draft them to do so, even though you could get them all for $100 a year from 10kvisit.com, as he explained in an email. So you take something like Nova Star, which was an originate and sell subprime mortgage lender, an archetype at the time. The name of the bond would be NHEL 2004-1, NEL 2004-2, NEL 2004-3, NEL 2004, etc. NEL 2004-1 would, for instance, contain loan from the first few months of 2004 and the last few months of 2003, and 2004-2 would have loan from middle part, and 2004-3 would get the later part of 2004. You could pull these prospectus and just quickly check the pulse of what was happening in the subprime mortgage portion of the originate and sell industry, and you'll see that 2 over 28 interest only ARM mortgages were only 5.85% of the pool in the early 2004, but by late 2004 they were 17.5% 48% of the pool. And by late summer 2005, 25.34% of the pool. Yet average FICO consumer credit I'm gonna read that part again tomorrow. I certainly didn't really understand the last part. Right. That was day 3 of 30 minutes reading The Big Short. Hope you guys enjoy the ride, and I'll see you all tomorrow again. See you guys. Bye.